What happens when a titan of industry, a woman whose name is etched onto skyscrapers, and whose decisions can reroute the flow of global capital, unravels in the middle of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant? It isn't a hostile takeover or a market downturn that brings her to her knees. It's a flicker of gold at the throat of a 21-year-old waitress, a young woman so buried in debt she counts her tips in her sleep. This is not merely a tale of the 1% and the 99. This is a story of a secret sealed by a slammed door 2 decades ago, a betrayal that festered in the heart of a powerful family, and a single handcrafted piece of jewelry that holds the key to unlocking a devastating truth. A truth that will either forge a new future or burn the entire legacy to the ground. This is the story of Catherine Davenport and the waitress who unknowingly wore a piece of her fractured soul. Catherine Davenport, at 48, was a masterpiece of controlled force. She had inherited Davenport Industries from her father, but it was she who had molded it into a global behemoth. Her world was a curated reality of tinted limousine windows, boardroom battles fought with steely whispers, and a penthouse apartment that floated above New York City like a modern Olympus. Her emotions were assets to be managed, liabilities to be contained. Grief was a line item she had written off years ago. Yet tonight was different. Tonight she was dining at Aria, a restaurant so exclusive its reservations were a form of currency among the city's elite. It was a calculated performance, a dinner with a rival magnate, Richard Sterling, a man whose empire she intended to absorb by dessert. She was a predator in her natural habitat, dressed in a severe yet elegant graphite-colored dress, her only adornment a pair of diamond earrings that cost more than a suburban home. She was dissecting Sterling's proposal, her mind a cold abacus of profit and loss, when a young woman approached their table. "More water, Mr. Sterling?" the waitress asked, her voice soft and slightly hesitant. Catherine didn't look up at first. The staff at Aria were trained to be ghosts, efficient and invisible. But Richard, a man who prided himself on a folksy charm that masked a piranha's instincts, engaged her. "Thank you, dear. It's a warm night for a negotiation, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," the waitress murmured, her attention on her task. As she leaned forward to pour the water, the soft, strategic lighting of the restaurant caught a glint of gold just below the hollow of her throat. It was a pendant on a fine, delicate chain. Not a mass-produced trinket, but something unique, artisanal. It was a small, intricately detailed firefly, its tiny abdomen crafted from a single, luminous piece of Baltic amber. Catherine's breath snagged in her chest. The polished silver of her water goblet felt suddenly slick in her grip. The carefully constructed walls of her composure, built brick by painstaking brick over 22 years, began to tremble. It wasn't possible. It was a ghost, a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. There was only one firefly pendant like that in the entire world. She knew because she had commissioned it herself. She had sat with a reclusive Florentine jeweler for a week, sketching the design on vellum, insisting the amber capture the exact color of a summer sunset. A 26th birthday present for her wild, brilliant, lost younger sister, Lily. The necklace. Catherine's voice was a raw, unfamiliar rasp. It cut through the polite murmur of the restaurant, causing Richard Sterling to pause mid-sentence, his fork hovering over his plate. The waitress straightened up, a look of startled confusion on her young, tired face. Her name tag pinned neatly to her black uniform read Maya. She instinctively touched the firefly, her fingers closing around it protectively. "Oh, I'm sorry. Is it against the dress code? I can take it off." "No," Catherine said, the word cracking. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the marble floor. Her eyes, the sharp, analytical tools of her trade, were now clouded with a gathering storm of emotion she hadn't felt since her 20s. She stared at the pendant, her memory supplying every detail the distance obscured. The tiny, almost invisible inscription on the back of one silver wing. "Loose Maya, my light." "Where did you get that?" The question was not a polite inquiry. It was a raw, desperate demand, stripped of all corporate polish. Maya took a half step back, intimidated by the sudden, terrifying intensity of the powerful woman before her. The entire restaurant seemed to hush, turning to look at their table. It, it was my mother's, Maya stammered, her hand still shielding the pendant. She gave it to me before she passed away. Your mother? Catherine's mind was a maelstrom. Lily, the shouting match in the foyer of their family home. The accusations. You only care about the Davenport name. You don't care about me. The slam of the front door echoing into a silence that had lasted for 22 years. Catherine rose to her feet, her movements unsteady. The carefully maintained facade of the unshakable CEO was not just cracking, it was shattering. She reached a trembling hand across the table, not towards Maya, but towards the golden firefly, as if it were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. Please, Catherine whispered, and the sound was so broken, so full of anguish, that it startled even herself. I need to know. What was your mother's name? Maya's brow furrowed with genuine concern. This impeccably dressed, powerful woman was visibly disintegrating in front of a room full of Manhattan's most influential people. Ma'am, are you okay? Should I get some water? Her name, Catherine insisted, her voice rising, drawing shocked stares. A single hot tear escaped her eye, tracing a path through her flawless makeup. Then another, and another. The Titan, the Queen of Commerce, Catherine Davenport, stood in the center of Aria and began to weep. A silent, convulsive breakdown that shook her entire body, all for a waitress's necklace. Maya, stunned and overwhelmed, could only whisper the answer, the name that was a quiet ache in her own heart. Her name was Sarah Collins. The name meant nothing to Catherine. A blank, a dead end. The flicker of impossible hope died, and the grief crashed over her with renewed force. But then, as Maya watched the woman crumble, a forgotten memory surfaced. Her mother, weak in her hospital bed, pressing the necklace into her hand. My real name didn't matter, Maya. Sarah Collins was a good name, a safe name, the name of the woman who raised me. Maya's eyes widened. She had never understood what it meant. It had been one of her mother's cryptic, pain-filled pronouncements. But now... Wait, Maya said, her own voice trembling as a wild, terrifying possibility bloomed in her mind. She once told me that wasn't her birth name. She said she was born a Davenport. The world stopped. Catherine's head snapped up, her tear-filled eyes locking on Maya's. The name, whispered in the hushed opulence of Aria, was a lit match dropped on a trail of gasoline. Lily Davenport. The silence in the car was thick enough to be a third passenger. It was a custom Maybach, a silent leather-lined cocoon that glided through the city streets. Maya sat rigidly on the plush seat, the unfamiliar luxury feeling alien and abrasive against her skin. She had been bundled out of Aria so quickly, her manager's bewildered face the last thing she saw. Beside her, Catherine Davenport stared out the window, her tears dried, but her face a pale mask of shock and profound sorrow. They arrived at a sleek, modern skyscraper in Tribeca. A private elevator ascended directly into Catherine's penthouse, a sprawling space of glass, steel, and minimalist art that felt more like a modern museum than a home. The view of the glittering city skyline was breathtaking, a panorama of power that made Maya feel infinitesimally small. A man was waiting for them as the elevator doors opened. He was in his early 60s with a quiet, watchful demeanor and the impeccably tailored suit of a man who missed nothing. His face, etched with lines of concern, was directed at Catherine. Arthur, Catherine said, her voice heavy, something has happened. I gathered as much when you left Mr. Sterling with a half-eaten lobster and avoided contract, he replied, his voice a calm baritone. His sharp, intelligent eyes flicked to Maya, assessing her worn sneakers, her cheap black slacks, her state of bewildered shock. It was not a hostile look, but a deeply analytical one. This is Arthur Sterling, Catherine said to Maya, gesturing to the man. My head of security and the only person I trust. Arthur, this is Maya. She was wearing Lily's necklace. Arthur's professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something, pain, memory, regret, crossed his face before it was gone. He had been the head of the Davenport family's security for 30 years. He had been on duty the night Lily Davenport vanished. Catherine led Maya to a seating area with stark white sofas and a glass table. She finally sank into one, her body seeming to deflate. "Please sit." Maya perched on the edge of the sofa, the firefly pendant feeling like a lead weight on her chest. "I don't understand any of this," she whispered. "That necklace," Catherine began, her gaze fixed on it. "I gave it to my sister, Lily, for her 26th birthday. A week later, she was gone." She began to tell the story, her voice low and laced with a pain that 22 years had failed to numb. Lily was the opposite of Catherine, a free spirit, an artist, a musician who cared more for lyrics than ledgers. She was the heart of the family, while Catherine was its calculating mind. They had clashed, as sisters do, especially after their father's death when Catherine took over the company. The final fight had been about a musician Lily had fallen in love with, a man Catherine and her brother, Marcus, had deemed utterly unsuitable. "We told her he was after her money. We threatened to cut her off," Catherine confessed, shame coloring her words. "She said we were trying to own her, not love her. She packed a bag and walked out. We thought she'd be back when her money ran out, but she never touched her trust fund. She just disappeared." Maya listened, her own life story being rewritten with every word. Her mother, Lily, had raised her alone in a series of cramped apartments. She had been a fiercely loving but deeply melancholic woman, working as a music teacher and gigging in smoky bars to make ends meet. She always said Maya's father had died before she was born, and that her own family was long gone. The lies were a wall she had built around their small world. Now Maya was seeing the bricks of that wall for the first time. "My mother," Maya said slowly, trying out the new reality. "She died 3 months ago, an aneurysm. It was very sudden. She had so many medical bills. I've been working double shifts ever since." The confession slipped out, a raw truth in this sterile, wealthy space. "She was sick?" Catherine asked, her face paling further. "For a while," Maya admitted. "She hid it well. She was always trying to protect me." The two women sat in silence, separated by a gulf of 22 years of secrets, lies, and missed chances. A CEO had just discovered her sister had lived and died in poverty, leaving behind a niece she never knew existed. And a waitress was learning her mother was a lost heiress, a fugitive from a life of unimaginable privilege. "You have her eyes," Catherine said at last, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. That same defiance. She leaned forward, her composure returning, the CEO re-emerging. "Maya, I want to help you. The bills, your apartment, whatever you need. Everything that should have been your mother's is now yours." Before Maya could even begin to process the magnitude of that offer, the penthouse elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. A man and a woman stepped out, dressed for a gala. The man was handsome in a florid, self-satisfied way, with Catherine's sharp features, but none of her intensity. The woman beside him was flawlessly sculpted, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, her neck and wrists glittering with diamonds. They were Marcus Davenport, Catherine's younger brother, and his wife Eleanor. "Catherine, darling," Eleanor trilled, gliding into the room. "We were waiting for you at the fundraiser. What on earth happened? We heard you caused quite a scene at—" Her voice trailed off as her cold, appraising eyes landed on Maya. She took in the cheap uniform, the exhausted face, the entire picture that screamed out of place. Marcus's smile was equally dismissive. "Catherine, who is this?" he asked, his tone less a question and more an accusation. "Arthur said you had an emergency. This doesn't look like an emergency. It looks like you brought the help home." The casual cruelty of his words made Maya flinch. Catherine stood up, her spine straightening, the matriarch of the Davenport clan reasserting her authority. The moment of vulnerability was over. "Marcus, Eleanor, this is Maya Collins." She paused, letting the silence stretch, before delivering the blow. "She is Lily's daughter, my niece." The statement detonated in the quiet room. Eleanor's perfectly made-up face froze in a mask of disbelief. Marcus let out a short, barking laugh. "Lily's daughter? Catherine, have you lost your mind? Lily ran off with some deadbeat musician 2 decades ago. This is preposterous." "It is not preposterous," Catherine said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Look at her necklace. It's the firefly, The one I gave Lily. Eleanor drifted closer, peering at the pendant as if it were a curious insect. A piece of jewelry? Please, Catherine. That proves nothing. It could be a copy, it could be stolen. This girl is obviously a clever little grifter who has preyed on your sentimentality. The accusation, so bald and vicious, ignited a spark of anger in Maya. She found her voice shaky but firm. I am not a grifter. I didn't ask for any of this. I was at my job. Silence, Marcus snapped, waving a dismissive hand at her. He turned back to his sister, his expression a mixture of condescension and concern. Catherine, listen to yourself. You're being emotional. A waitress spins a sob story, flashes a trinket, and suddenly you're ready to welcome her into the family? Think of the scandal. Think of the Davenport name. I am thinking of my family, Catherine shot back, her voice ringing with newfound conviction. My blood, Marcus. Something you seem to have forgotten. Her alleged blood, Eleanor corrected smoothly, placing a manicured hand on her husband's arm. A claim like this requires proof. Real proof, not a tearful reunion over a piece of costume jewelry. The tension in the room was thick with malice. Maya felt like a specimen pinned to a board. These people weren't seeing a grieving young woman who had just lost her mother. They were seeing a threat to their inheritance, a disruption to their perfect wealthy world. I don't want your money, Maya said, her voice steadier now, fueled by indignation. I just found out my mother wasn't who I thought she was. I just found out I have a grandmother, an aunt. She looked at Catherine, her expression softening. That's all this is about for me. Her genuine emotion seemed to only harden Marcus's suspicion. He saw it as a performance, a well-played move. How touching, he sneered. Well, in the world of Davenport Industries, we don't operate on touching stories. We operate on facts. There's only one way to settle this. He locked eyes with his sister, his expression a cold challenge. A DNA test? Eleanor nodded enthusiastically. Precisely. A legally binding, scientifically verified test. We'll have our attorneys handle everything. We'll use the top lab. There will be no room for fraud. The word fraud was aimed directly at Maya. She felt the sting of it, the humiliation. This night had gone from shocking to surreal to terrifying. She just wanted to go home to her tiny, shabby apartment, to a world that made sense. Catherine looked at Maya, her expression apologetic but resolute. He's right, Maya, not because I have any doubt. In my heart, I know who you are. But to silence them, to make it official, undeniable, for your sake. Maya felt a trap closing around her. To refuse would be an admission of guilt. To agree was to step deeper into this viper's nest. She thought of her mother's unpaid hospital bills, the eviction notice she knew was coming. A life without that constant, grinding worry was an impossible dream. But at what price? She took a deep breath and met Marcus's icy glare. Fine, she said, her voice clear and strong. Do the test. You'll see. Marcus gave a curt, triumphant nod. Excellent. Our lawyer will be in touch tomorrow to arrange for the samples. He then turned to Catherine, his tone proprietary. And until those results are in, you are not to give this woman a single cent. This is clearly an elaborate shakedown, and we won't have the family fortune depleted by a con artist. She will be staying here, in this house, as my guest, Catherine declared, her voice ringing with an authority that brooked no argument. A flicker of fury crossed Marcus's face before he masked it with a tight smile. As you wish, Catherine, but don't say we didn't warn you. With a final contemptuous look at Maya, Marcus and Eleanor turned and swept back into the elevator, their victory palpable. The faint possibility of a warm reunion had been extinguished, replaced by the cold, clinical reality of what was to come. Maya wasn't just discovering a family. She was being drawn into a war she had no idea how to fight. The following week was a masterclass in psychological torment. The penthouse, with its panoramic views and priceless art, became Maya's gilded cage. The household staff, loyal to Catherine but intimidated by Marcus, treated her with a frigid, formal politeness that was more alienating than open hostility. She was a guest who was not welcome, a ghost haunting the halls of a life that wasn't hers. Catherine, to her credit, tried to bridge the chasm of time and class. She would sit with Maya for hours, asking about Lily's life, her face a canvas of regret, as Maya described their small, love-filled, but perpetually struggling existence. She showed Maya old photo albums, filled with images of a smiling, vibrant Lily before she had vanished. A fragile, tentative bond began to form between them, woven from shared memories of a woman they had both loved and lost in different ways. But Marcus and Eleanor were relentless. They saw Catherine's growing affection for Maya not as a healing process, but as a catastrophic failure of judgment. Their visits to the penthouse became more frequent, their presence a constant, poisoning drip of suspicion. "She's playing on your grief, Catherine," Marcus would say, his tone one of feigned concern. "It's a classic long con. She's patient. She'll wait for the DNA results, and then the floodgates will open. She'll want a house, a trust fund, a seat on the board." "She hasn't asked for anything," Catherine would counter, though a sliver of doubt, planted by her brother's ceaseless campaign, began to take root in the back of her mind. She was a businesswoman, trained to see angles and motives in everyone. Was it possible she was being blinded by hope? Maya, meanwhile, felt the weight of their scrutiny in every interaction. One afternoon, she was looking at a framed photograph of Lily in the grand hallway. Lily was laughing, her head thrown back, the firefly pendant bright against her skin. "She was always so dramatic," Eleanor's voice, sharp and cold, came from behind her. Maya turned to see her aunt by marriage watching her, a cruel little smile on her lips. Always the center of attention, it's no surprise she ran off. She couldn't stand not being the star of the show. "It seems you've inherited her flair for the theatrical." "I'm not being theatrical," Maya said quietly. "I'm just trying to understand." "Oh, I think you understand perfectly," Eleanor purred, stepping closer. "You understand that you've stumbled upon the lottery ticket of a lifetime. A word of advice from someone who knows how this world works. Take a settlement. Once the DNA is confirmed, Catherine will offer you a generous one to make you go away. A few million. Take it. Because if you try for more, if you try to become a Davenport Doe, we will crush you. We will find every mistake you have ever made, every secret you have ever kept, and we will burn your life to the ground. You will wish you had never laid eyes on that necklace." The threat was naked, a venomous promise. Maya stared back, horrified but resolute. "This isn't about money." Eleanor let out a tinkling, mirthless laugh. "Oh, you poor sweet thing. It's always about money." While the open warfare was waged by Eleanor, Marcus's attack was more insidious. He knew he couldn't wait for the DNA results. He had to neutralize Maya before she became an official, irrefutable part of the family. He made a call to a man who specialized in creating problems and solutions, a private investigator named Finch, a man who operated in the city's grayest moral shadows. "I need you to find something on a girl named Maya Collins," Marcus instructed over a burner phone. "Something that proves she's untrustworthy. A criminal record, a history of fraud, anything." "And if there's nothing to find?" Finch's voice was gravelly. "Then you get creative," Marcus said coldly. "Everyone has a price. Find someone from her past, an old boss, an old landlord. Give them a reason to remember something unpleasant about her, something that makes her look like a thief." Finch went to work. Maya's life, however, was disappointingly clean. She was a hard worker, well-liked by her colleagues at Aria, and had no criminal history. But Marcus's suggestion had planted a seed. Finch found the manager of a small coffee shop where Maya had worked a year ago. The man, drowning in gambling debt, was more than receptive to Finch's offer. For $50,000 in cash, he was willing to sign a sworn affidavit. The affidavit would state that Maya Collins had been fired for skimming from the register. He would claim he hadn't pressed charges out of pity because she was a young girl with a sick mother. It was the perfect lie, plausible, damning, and designed to paint Maya as a desperate thief who preyed on kindness. Unaware of the storm gathering around her, Maya was focused on a puzzle of her own. Catherine, in an attempt to connect Maya with her mother's past, had given her a small box of Lily's old belongings they had found preserved in a storage room. It contained sketchbooks, poetry journals, and a few letters. Maya spent an afternoon looking through them. Lily's handwriting was a beautiful, flowing script, full of expressive loops and flourishes. As an avid reader of historical biographies, Maya had developed a casual interest in graphology, the analysis of handwriting. She had a dog-eared paperback on the subject she'd read a dozen times, fascinated by how a person's character could be revealed in the slant of their T's or the curve of their G's. She noticed the unique way Lily formed her capital D with a small, defiant loop at the top, so different from the severe, angular D in the Davenport Industries logo she saw everywhere. She also found a birthday card Lily had written to Marcus a year before she disappeared. The inscription was warm and affectionate. As Maya looked at Marcus's signature on the card, she felt a strange sense of something. It wasn't a conscious thought, just a flicker of recognition, a pattern her mind filed away without her realizing it. It was a small, seemingly insignificant detail in a sea of overwhelming new information. Meanwhile, Catherine had given her own directive. She called Arthur Sterling into her private study. "Arthur," she said, her voice betraying a hint of unease, "I want you to do a background check on Maya." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "You believe Marcus?" "No," Catherine said quickly, "but I am not a fool. I have built an empire by mitigating risk. My brother is right about one thing. This situation requires due diligence. I am letting my heart lead me, but my head needs to be sure. Look into her, quietly. I need to know there are no unpleasant surprises." Arthur nodded, a grim set to his jaw. He had failed to protect Lily 22 years ago. It was a failure that had haunted his entire career. He would not fail Catherine now. He began his own investigation, a thorough and professional inquiry that would soon put him on a collision course with the shadowy work of Finch. He started by going to Aria, and what he heard from Maya's co-workers painted a picture not of a thief, but of a loyal, hard-working young woman who often gave her tips to a busboy struggling more than she was. The two investigations, one seeking to manufacture a lie and the other to uncover the truth, were now running on parallel tracks, destined to collide at the worst possible moment. The day the DNA results were scheduled to arrive, the penthouse felt like a pressurized cabin. Catherine had summoned everyone: Maya, Marcus, and Eleanor. Even Arthur Sterling stood discreetly by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his presence a silent testament to the gravity of the occasion. The family lawyer, a portly, serious man named Mr. Hemlock, arrived carrying a single sealed envelope. He placed it on the glass coffee table with the solemnity of a judge delivering a verdict. "As requested," he began, his voice dry, "the results from the lab are conclusive." Marcus leaned forward, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Eleanor sat beside him, the picture of cool confidence. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. This single piece of paper would either validate her entire existence or brand her a liar forever. Mr. Hemlock broke the seal and unfolded the document. He cleared his throat. "The probability of a avuncular relationship between the subject, Maya Collins, and Marcus Davenport, based on the provided samples, is 99.998%. Furthermore, the mitochondrial DNA analysis confirms a direct maternal lineage to Catherine Davenport's mother, establishing without scientific doubt that Maya Collins is the daughter of the late Lily Davenport." A choked sob escaped Catherine's lips. She reached across the sofa and pulled Maya into a fierce, trembling hug. "I knew it," she whispered into Maya's hair. "I knew it." Relief, pure and overwhelming, washed over Maya. Tears streamed down her face as she hugged her aunt back. It was true, it was all true. But their moment was brutally short-lived. "Well," Marcus said loudly, clapping his hands together in a grotesque parody of celebration, "that's wonderful news, a cause for a real family celebration." He stood up, a file folder in his hand. "And in the spirit of family and of honesty, I believe there is one more piece of business we must address before we welcome our newest member." Catherine pulled back from Maya, her smile fading into a frown of confusion. "Marcus, what are you doing?" "My own due diligence, sister," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Protecting the family, just as you taught me." He opened the folder. "While we were waiting for these results, I was made aware of a rather disturbing incident from our dear Maya's past." He pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This is a sworn affidavit from a Mr. Gerald Finney, the manager of the Daily Grind coffee shop. He states that he was forced to terminate Ms. Collins's employment last year for repeatedly stealing from the cash register. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. What? Maya gasped, her blood running cold. That's a lie. I was laid off because of budget cuts. I never stole anything in my life. Ah, but Mr. Finney tells a different story, Marcus continued, his eyes gleaming with triumph. He says he didn't press charges because he felt sorry for you and your sick mother. A classic tale of preying on a good man's sympathy. It seems you have a history of manipulating people for money. He threw the affidavit onto the coffee table. It landed face up. Maya's eyes were drawn to the bottom of the page, a spidery, barely legible signature next to the name Gerald Finney. Catherine looked from the document to Maya's horrified face, and then to her brother's smug expression. The seed of doubt Marcus had so carefully planted was now being watered with what looked like undeniable proof. Her business instincts, the ones that screamed, "Never trust anyone completely," warred with the powerful emotional pull she felt towards Maya. "Maya, is this true?" Catherine asked, and the hesitation in her voice was like a physical blow. That flicker of doubt in her aunt's eyes broke something inside Maya. After a week of suspicion and hostility, after being stripped bare and examined like an insect, this was the final cut. "You believe him?" she whispered, her voice choked with hurt. She saw the conflict on Catherine's face, the agonizing uncertainty. And in that moment, Maya knew she couldn't live like this. She wouldn't. Before she could say another word, Arthur Sterling, who had been silent until now, Arthur Sterling took one deliberate step forward, his quiet presence suddenly commanding the entire cavernous room. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but it cut through the toxic silence with the clean, cold efficiency of a scalpel. "If I may, Mr. Davenport." Marcus, whose face was a bloated mask of triumphant rage, whirled on him. "This is a family matter, Arthur. You are staff." "On the contrary," Arthur replied, his gaze as steady and unyielding as the granite bedrock beneath the city. "Ms. Davenport tasked me with conducting my own inquiries into this very matter. A parallel investigation, if you will." His eyes, missing nothing, flickered from Marcus's apoplectic face to the forged affidavit on the table. "I also spoke with Mr. Gerald Finney. He produced a small, professional-grade digital recorder and placed it on the glass table next to the offending document. This is a recording from my conversation with him 2 days ago. In it, he refers to Maya as one of the most honest kids he's ever had the misfortune of letting go. He sounds quite regretful." Arthur paused, letting the implication settle like dust. It seems his memory has become quite creative in the last 48 hours. He then placed a slim, unmarked manila folder beside the recorder. "These are Mr. Finney's bank statements for the past month, acquired through a contact in financial forensics. They show a single anomalous cash deposit of $50,000 made yesterday afternoon. The deposit was made from a numbered company, a shell corporation which, after a few hours of unraveling its deliberately tangled ownership, I traced back to a private investigator named Julian Finch. An investigator, I might add." Arthur's voice dropped, each word a precisely placed nail in Marcus's coffin. "Who has been on your personal, off-the-books payroll for the last 5 years, Marcus." A profound, deathly stillness descended upon the room. The hum of the city outside seemed to vanish. Marcus's face drained of all color, leaving behind a waxy, mottled pallor. Eleanor's perfectly sculpted mask of composure did not crack. It shattered, her manicured hand flying to her mouth in a gesture of pure, undisguised panic. But Maya was not looking at them. The hurricane of betrayal, of hurt, of Catherine's momentary doubt had receded, leaving behind a strange, preternatural calm. The fury was still there, a hot coal in her gut. But it was focused now, honed to a fine point. She looked past the manufactured evidence, past the obvious conspiracy. She looked at Marcus, truly looked at him, and she saw the ghost of a story her mother had never fully told. She saw the sneer, the casual cruelty, the possessive entitlement that saw another human being not as family, but as a threat to be neutralized. It wasn't about the money, was it? Her voice was quiet, yet it resonated with an authority that stunned them all, including herself. Not just the money. My mother, she didn't run away from wealth. She ran away from this. She gestured around the opulent room, a gesture that encompassed not the art or the view, but the suffocating atmosphere of control. She ran away from being a piece on your chessboard, from being told who to love, how to live, what to feel. She ran from the idea that the Davenport name was more important than her own heart. She took a step toward Marcus, her eyes, Lily's eyes, locking onto his. You didn't see a niece walk into that restaurant. You saw a disruption. You saw a loose end, a narrative you couldn't control. You saw my mother all over again, and you did the only thing you know how to do. You tried to crush her. The accusation, so deeply personal and psychologically astute, landed with more force than any of Arthur's irrefutable evidence. It bypassed the crime and went straight to the motive, to the sickness at the heart of their family. It was then that Catherine moved. The doubt, the conflict that had flickered in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, incandescent certainty. She rose to her feet, not with the explosive rage of their last argument, but with the terrifying calm of a glacier preparing to calve. She stared at her brother, the man with whom she had shared a childhood, a legacy, and a lifetime of secrets. She saw him now as a stranger, a hollowed-out man consumed by envy and fear. "Get out," she said. The words were barely a whisper, yet they held the absolute finality of a death sentence. "Catherine, you can't be serious," Marcus sputtered, his desperation clawing its way back. "She's a nobody, a waitress. I have given my entire life to this company, to you. You have given your life to your own reflection, Marcus." Catherine's voice rose, not in a shout, but in a crescendo of controlled power that seemed to shake the very glass of the skyscraper. "You have fed on this family, on this legacy, like a parasite. My sister spent 22 years living in the shadows because she could not breathe the same air as you. You did not mourn her. You were relieved by her absence. And when her child, her living, breathing legacy appeared, your first and only instinct was to destroy her, to erase her, just as you wished you could erase Lily." She walked to the private elevator, her movements precise, her graphite dress a shroud of judgment. She pressed the button. "Mr. Hemlock will contact you with the terms of your severance from Davenport Industries and your disinheritance from the family trust. You will find I am being uncharacteristically щедрый. Consider it payment for the last service you will ever render this family, your permanent disappearance. If I ever see your face again, if you ever attempt to contact Maya or myself, Arthur's file will be sent not to our lawyers, but to the district attorney. Is that clear?" The elevator doors slid open with a soft, indifferent chime. Marcus stood frozen, his face a ruin of disbelief and fury. Eleanor was already tugging at his arm, her survival instincts screaming at her to flee. He gave one last venomous look at Maya, a look that promised a hatred that would fester for a lifetime. "You're making a mistake, Catherine," he spat. "She's just like her mother, another sentimental fool. She will disappoint you. She will break your heart all over again." Then he was gone. The doors slid shut, and the silence he left behind was immense, a vacuum that pulled at the three people left standing in its wake. The war was over. The cancer had been excised, but the wound was deep, gaping, and would take a lifetime to heal. The days that followed were not filled with joyous discovery, but with a strange and disorienting silence. The penthouse, which had been a battleground, now felt like a mausoleum. For Maya, the sudden absence of threat was as jarring as its presence had been. She drifted through the sprawling, minimalist spaces like a ghost, the sheer scale of the wealth around her an oppressive weight. She would wake in a bed with sheets of an impossible thread count and stare at the ceiling, her mind still wired for the screech of the subway and the anxiety of an overdue bill. She was living in a dream, but her body still remembered the nightmare of survival. Catherine, retreating into the familiar armor of work, threw herself into the legal and financial demolition of her brother's life with a ruthless efficiency that was both terrifying and necessary. But when she emerged from her office in the evenings, Maya could see the toll. The matriarch, the titan, looked breakable. She had not just lost a corrupt brother, She had lost the last remaining pillar of the family she'd grown up with. She had chosen her niece, her sister's ghost, over living flesh and blood, and the gravity of that choice haunted the quiet dinners they shared, their conversations stilted and cautious, two strangers bound by blood and tragedy, terrified of making a wrong move. One morning, Maya woke before dawn, the city a tapestry of glittering light below. She couldn't breathe. She dressed in her old clothes, the worn jeans and faded t-shirt that still smelled faintly of her tiny apartment's laundry detergent, and slipped out. She took a cab back to her old neighborhood, a desperate pilgrimage to a life that no longer existed. She stood on the pavement across from her building, watching the new tenants move in. She saw her reflection in the window of the bodega on the corner, and for a moment she didn't recognize the woman staring back. The exhaustion was still there, but it was a different kind. It was the weariness of a soldier after a long, brutal war, unsure of what peace was supposed to feel like. That evening, Catherine found her in the penthouse library, staring blankly at a wall of leather-bound first editions. "I don't belong here," Maya whispered, the words she had been holding back for days finally spilling out. "I feel like I'm wearing a costume. Every minute, I'm waiting for someone to tap me on the shoulder and tell me to get back to my shift." Catherine didn't offer platitudes. She didn't speak of birthrights or destiny. She simply sat down in the armchair opposite her. "I spent 22 years feeling the same way," she confessed, her voice low and raw. "After Lily left and Father died, I walked into the boardroom wearing his suits, trying to fill his shoes. Every man in that room was waiting for me to fail. For years, I felt like an imposter in my own life. I learned to build walls," Catherine Davenport, the CEO. "It was a role I played. It took a long time for the role to become real." She looked at Maya, her eyes filled with a sad, profound understanding. "The difference is you are not an imposter, Maya. You are just unaccustomed. We need to go back to the beginning." The next day, Arthur drove them out of the city deep into the rolling green hills of Connecticut to the original Davenport estate. It was a place Catherine hadn't visited since before Lily had left. It had been maintained by a small staff, but was otherwise preserved in amber, a monument to a past she had tried to outrun. She led Maya up a winding staircase to the attic. At the far end, under a large Palladian window, was a door. "This was her studio," Catherine said, her hand hesitating on the brass knob. "No one has been inside since she left." The air inside was thick with the scent of turpentine, linseed oil, and thyme. Dust motes danced in the shafts of afternoon light. Canvases, draped in yellowed muslin sheets, stood like silent sentinels on easels. Jars crowded with stiff, dried brushes lined the shelves. It was a sanctuary, a time capsule. Together, in a silence that was reverent, they began to lift the cloths, and Lily Davenport came roaring back to life. The paintings were an explosion of color and emotion. Not the quiet, melancholic woman Maya knew, but a vibrant, passionate, furious soul. There were chaotic cityscapes, intimate portraits of musicians in smoky clubs, and vast abstract canvases that swirled with joy and rage. In a corner, tucked away, was a small, locked chest. Arthur, with a practiced hand, picked the simple lock. Inside, beneath a stack of sketchbooks, was a bundle of letters, tied with a faded velvet ribbon. They were addressed to Catherine. All of them were unsent. They sat on the dusty floor of the studio, the late afternoon sun warming their backs, and Catherine read her sister's words aloud. Her voice, usually so strong and certain, trembled and broke as she gave voice to the ghost that had haunted them both. The letters told the story of the missing years. Lily wrote of the fear and the freedom of her new life, of changing her name to Sarah Collins, the name of a kind librarian who had helped her in the early days. She wrote of falling deeper in love with Maya's father, a brilliant but troubled musician who died in a car accident just months before Maya was born. She wrote of the grinding poverty, the bone-deep terror of raising a child alone with no safety net, and she wrote of why she never came back. "Dearest Cat," Catherine read, her voice thick with tears. "You must think I am proud or foolish, or both. Perhaps I am, but I look at my little girl, my Maya, and I see the light of my life, and I cannot bring her back to that house. I cannot have her spirit crushed by the weight of the Davenport name. I cannot have her think that her value is measured in stock prices and acquisitions. I ran away to save myself. I am staying away to save her. I want her to know love without condition, success without cruelty, and freedom without a price tag. I miss you more than words can say. I hope one day you'll understand. All my love, your lost sister, Lily. The letter fell from Catherine's hand. The full, devastating truth settled over them. Lily's absence had not been an act of rebellion, but an act of fierce, desperate, maternal love. She hadn't been abandoned. She had been protected. In that dusty, sunlit room, surrounded by the vibrant evidence of Lily's soul, the final wall between Catherine and Maya crumbled. They grieved together, not as a CEO and a long-lost heir, but as an aunt and a niece. Two women mourning the brilliant, complicated woman who connected them, finally understanding the true cost of her sacrifice. The journey back to the city was different. The silence in the car was no longer awkward, but companionable. Something had shifted, settled. Maya was no longer a ghost haunting Catherine's penthouse. She was its purpose. In the weeks that followed, a new family began to form. An unlikely trinity. Catherine, the strategist with immense power. Maya, the heart with lived experience and radical empathy. And Arthur, the guardian with the wisdom to bridge the two worlds. He became Maya's guide, not just teaching her about the complexities of her inheritance, but about how to wield power without being corrupted by it. He taught her to see threats before they materialized, to read the intentions behind a handshake, to understand that in her new world, kindness could be mistaken for weakness. He was atoning for his failure to protect Lily by forging her daughter into someone who could protect herself. One day, Maya received a call from a former co-worker at Aria. A busboy named Carlos, a young man with a wife and two small children, had been a friend. She learned his wife had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer, and the medical bills had already wiped out their savings. They were about to be evicted. Without a second thought, Maya called the family's lawyers. "I want to pay their medical bill," she said, "all of them, and their rent for the next year." A few days later, she went to visit Carlos's family in their cramped apartment in the Bronx. She didn't go as a benefactress, but as a friend. She expected to find relief, gratitude. Instead, she found a family broken by the system. Carlos's wife was in pain. The new treatment wasn't working, and Carlos was staring at a new mountain of paperwork from the insurance company, denying a crucial procedure. Maya's money, a fortune to them, was just a temporary patch on a systemic wound. It could delay their ruin, but it couldn't cure the disease of a society that punished people for getting sick. She left their apartment with a cold, hard clarity she hadn't felt since the night in the restaurant. Her indignation, her mother's struggle, Carlos's despair, it all coalesced into a singular, burning purpose. She returned to the penthouse and found Catherine in her study, poring over quarterly reports. "I know what I want to do," Maya said, her voice ringing with a conviction that made Catherine look up from her work. "The Davenport Foundation. Marcus used it for tax shelters and vanity projects. I want to burn it to the ground and build something real." She laid out her vision, born from her own raw pain in Carlos's quiet desperation. Not a foundation that gave handouts, but one that fought back. An initiative that would provide not just direct financial relief for families crushed by medical debt, but a team of ruthless, high-powered lawyers, the kind of lawyers that Davenports used to crush their rivals, to fight the insurance companies on their behalf. It would be a weapon funded by the system to be used against the system itself. She would call it the Lily Initiative, not a memorial to her mother, but a continuation of her fight. Catherine listened, her expression unreadable. When Maya finished, a slow smile spread across her face. It was the first genuine, unguarded smile Maya had ever seen from her. It transformed her. In that smile, Maya saw not the titan of industry, but a proud older sister. "Marcus always said Lily was a bad investment," Catherine said, her voice full of wonder. "He was wrong. She was just ahead of her time. Her return on investment is staggering." She stood up and walked to the bar, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. "To the Lily Initiative," she said, handing a glass to Maya. "May it be a holy terror." Months later, they stood on the penthouse terrace, the city sprawling beneath them like a field of fallen stars. The Lily Initiative was in full motion, already a feared and respected name in patient advocacy circles. Maya had found her voice, not in the boardrooms Catherine frequented, but in hospital waiting rooms and community centers. The firefly pendant rested against her skin, its amber warm from her body heat. It was no longer a mystery, no longer just a link to the past. It was a compass. I used to think power was about control, Catherine said softly, watching the endless flow of traffic on the bridges below. About building walls so high that nothing could ever hurt you. I built a fortress, and all I did was trap myself inside it. She turned to Maya. You and your mother, you taught me that true power isn't about control. It's about connection. It's about using your strength to shelter others, not just yourself. Maya touched the pendant, the tiny silver wings smooth beneath her fingertips. She would be proud of you, Catherine. She would be proud of us, Catherine corrected, her eyes shining with an emotion that was no longer just grief, but a fierce, brilliant pride. She reached out, her fingers gently grazing the necklace. Loose Mia, she whispered, the familiar words now holding a new, expanded meaning. My light. It was no longer just about Lily or Maya. It was about the light they were creating together. A legacy not etched in steel and glass, but built from empathy, forged in righteous anger, and dedicated to the simple, radical belief that no one should have to walk through the darkness alone. The waitress and the CEO, the niece and the aunt, stood together as equals, watching over their city, their purpose finally clear, guided home by the quiet, unwavering glow of a golden firefly.